There do I see my father, my mother, my brothers and my sisters. I see the line of my people back to the beginning. They bid me to take my place among them in the walls of Valhalla, where the brave shall live forever. So this is how most people picture a Viking funeral. Some Viking, most likely related to the deceased person, says some epic quote, then fires a fire arrow towards a boat where the deceased is laid with all his belongings and the boat burns down. Well, just as with most of romanticized history, this view isn't quite accurate, but it also isn't completely far from the truth. Before I start talking about the Viking and or Norse funerals, I want to address the already butthurt people typing off in the comments telling me that not all Norse are Viking, but all Viking are Norse. This is because the term Viking is mostly used to just describe the northern raiders, which were also pirates and mostly farmers during the Viking Age that pillaged Europe for about 3 centuries, as opposed to the word Norse, which is used to describe everyone else from the European north that share a common culture and language, which includes the Vikings, but also includes Norse traders, settlers, explorers, and just people living in northern Europe, not necessarily limited to the Viking Age. What we know about Viking funerals comes mostly from archaeological finds, Norse sagas, runestones, and even some Norse poetry. From those, we learned that Norse people during the Viking Age preferred cremation over a mound burial, also called tumuli or stone ship burial, both of which were more common in pre-Viking Age Scandinavia. However, this doesn't mean that those kinds of burials disappeared completely. There are remains of Viking mounds or stone ship burials around Scandinavia. Some were used as straight up burials, sometimes including full-size ships, some were used for only ash burial, some were used for ancestral worshipping, and some were purely symbolic, filled with deceased Viking possessions rather than remains, which most likely were burned. The 2 main ways Vikings burned their deceased was in a burning ship, which we'll get to in a moment, and in a burning pyre. The pyre was constructed out of wood in a way as to form the largest possible smokestack. This was because the Norse people believed that the larger the smokestack, the easier it was for the deceased to enter afterlife. The pyre usually contained, along with the corpse, offerings that would be accordance to the status of the deceased in the society, and sometimes also the person's slaves, and even on occasion his wife. The entire procedure itself was very ceremonious, and this leads us to the burning ship burial. The only complete first-hand account of a Norse ship burial comes from a 10th century Arab Muslim writer named Ahmed. His account goes as follows. When a great man dies, the members of his family say to his slave girls and young slave boys, "Which of you will die with him?" One of them replies, "I will." Once they have spoken, it is irreversible, and there is no turning back. Everyone busies himself about the dead man and preparing everything that he will need. Meanwhile, the slave girl spends each day drinking and singing happily and joyfully. When the day of the funeral came, they prepared the boat, fitting it with more wood and weapons, offerings including but not limited to vegetables, fruits, food, sacrificed dog, horses, cow, and chickens too. They prepared a mattress to put the deceased man on with his slave, and everything was overseen by an old witch called the Angel of Death. Meanwhile, the slave girl who wanted to be killed came and went, entering in turn each of the pavilions that had been built, and the master of each pavilion had intercourse with her, saying, "Tell your master that I only did this for your love of him." When the time had come for the evening prayer, they led the slave girl towards something which they had constructed, and which looked like a frame of a door. They then proceeded to lift the girl 3 times above the frame, during which she said, "There I see my father and my mother. There I see all my dead relatives sitting. There I see my master sitting in paradise, and paradise is green and beautiful. There are men with him and young people, and he is calling me, take me to him." After, the woman was taken on board, where she was made to drink by the Angel of Death. Next, 6 men entered and lay with the girl, one after another, after which they laid her beside her master. The Angel of Death came and put a cord round her neck in such a way that 2 ends went in opposite directions. She gave the ends to 2 of the men, so they could pull on them. Then she herself approached the girl, holding in her hand a dagger with a broad blade, and plunged it again and again between the girl's ribs. while the two men strangled her with the cord until she was dead. After which everyone left the boat, and the boat was set on fire by a man holding a torch who was completely naked. After the remnants of what was left from the fire were drawn out of the river, a small mound was created on the side with a wooden post inscribed with the name of the chieftain and the king. Not mentioned in Ahmed's writing, but usually there was also a big celebration on the 7th day of a man's death where people would drink and the heirs could only then rightfully claim their inheritance. So this is how a ship burial looked like, but this is also the only first-hand account of a Norse ship burial we have. Therefore, keep in mind this doesn't mean that all Norse ship burials were like this. In fact, we're pretty certain that areas all around Scandinavia had different burial customs with major overarching themes. It is important to look at the writer and understand that even today, two written stories of the same thing may be widely different depending on who is writing it, and same goes for this story. Norse burials are complicated and most likely widely different depending on various factors like the status symbol of the person or the area and era where it's done or the actual people that are doing the ceremony. But that still doesn't defeat from the amazement such customs bring to our eyes today and their captivating romanticized counterparts of today's media.